culture doesn't change overnight. And
Right.
so to your point, when they say everybody's afraid, it should, as a leader, should make you be introspective and say, what did I do to make them afraid? Because that's what you need to undo. Because there's something that was, if you're a brand new leader, you just, okay, that's a different situation. But I would say most of the time it is, seasoned leaders who have been there and we're saying people are afraid, we're not getting innovation, they won't take risks. And you have to ask yourself, it's like, what have we done? As leaders, what have we done?
I'm Lorne Rubis. Welcome to Culture Talks, where we visit with next gen leaders solving the world's biggest, nastiest problems, and people like Wayne Sutter Matamoros that help people like that do that. And so we're so delighted to have you on today, Wayne, on Culture Talks. Where are you parked today? Where are your feet centered today?
So, yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much, Lauren. I'm really excited to be here. I always have such great conversations with you off podcasts. And so it's nice to have this format to be able to share a really good conversation. So today I'm in Queens, New York. So as they say, the world's burning, probably the most diverse district in the world. So as it happens, hopefully you can hear a bird or two. It's a really lovely day. So it's nice
That's
to speak
great.
with you on a lovely day.
That's great. And I love the city. I try to get there a couple times a year, and it's the center of just so much vibrance that thank you for bringing that energy to our conversation. Wayne is a head of a design company called Empathy. And it's and please dig in and find out more about it. I'll give you a chance to talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
He's also an adjunct professor at NYU. We share this common opportunity to be mentors at this great group called the Unreasonable Group. You were the chief strategy officer there for 3 years,
That's
which
correct.
is tremendous compliment because it's such a advanced thinking organization, and for you to have that kind of an impact there is remarkable. So thank you for joining us, Wayne. Like I say, we've had great conversations outside of the podcast, but here we get to share with a bunch of other people. And your whole world is around human-centered design. That's what you and so I'm just going to park for a moment. Tell me more about your thinking about human-centered design. What would you like our audience to know about that, the way you think about it, and just the resonant role it plays in helping organizations advance?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I mean, in some ways we call it something new. Really, a lot of you hear a lot of terms: human-centered design, service design, design thinking. There's a lot of different ways to think about it. I prefer human-centered design because I think what makes it unique is that you can approach problems from analytical perspectives and looking at business landscapes if it's something in business, or even technology, for instance. And I think human-centered design is all about starting with people. And I think it's something, as you mentioned, that the frame that I work with is empathy. And it really is about empathy. And so no matter what the problem is, and it can be a problem as small as creating a new pen, or it can be, a challenge that's as big as changing the trajectory of a city or a country. If you start with people and you get to know them and you understand them and you really understand kind of their motivations, what makes them get up, what makes them, really tick, and identify those nuggets and build systems, services, products, strategies, whatever it might be, you build it around their needs. And so what I like about it, I think there's something when you do it well, there's something that's actually very selfless because you have to, put away your own ego and thinking like, oh, I have the solution. And actually what you do, especially when you're doing this in the impact space, is you have to actually empower them, understand them, and empower them to come up with the solutions. And so I think for me, the simplest way to put it is solving difficult challenges by starting with the people.
So, by the way, I want to park on the word empathy, and I want to come back. I want to come back to both of those areas. And just to be a little bit provocative here, I think if I quote Elon Musk on Joe Rogan, he said that empathy is a human defect. It's actually gets in the way. And there are a lot of admirers of Elon Musk out there with all this controversy. Those are big, long lineups. And what's your reaction to that? That empathy is a defect. And it's a serious question.
No, it is. And I remember when I first heard that, it was so disheartening. I think we came to see a lot of the decisions we're seeing now, you know, politically and on the world stage, the decisions that lack empathy and how they impact people. And so to hear that was really disheartening. Really put out there that something is actually, you might even say, aside from opposable thumbs, or in addition to opposable thumbs, it's what makes us human. And that ability to actually, for me to look at you, Lauren, and to say, you know what, I don't want Lauren to hurt. I don't know what pain feels like. I don't want Lauren to feel pain. And so therefore, I'm going to do what I can to not have her feel. You know, in a way, empathy is very important. It's based off of the things that we know and we feel. And so to think about this idea of it being a defect is actually such a disservice to humanity, because I think so much of beauty in the world comes from empathy. If you think about the relationships that we have, you know, if you think about when you travel to a country and you're empathetic to who you're visiting and you try to understand them, and when you find click and you know you learn from them about the ways that they do things, it's one of the most beautiful moments that you can have. And so I think opposite from a defect, and you know, in the context he was talking about, I think is you know in terms of like business and really this idea of you know control and this limitless growth and these things that he gets in the way. Um, you know, I think it's helps. I think it's an enabler. I think it's something that inspires, and I think for people who are really dialed into what empathy means and they use it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it's obviously in leadership and culture, which, you know, and we'll be speaking more. It's such a motivator, you know, to really to look at people you work with that might work for you, that are in your communities, and to actually think, you know, it's like I can somehow put myself in their shoes and want to help them. And I think for a lot of humanity, and I'd like to think the majority, you know, that's the motivating factor for so many of the things that they do in day to day.
You know, I'm obviously deeply biased to your perspective on this, not only by the fact that it's right from a character perspective, but the data and the research is so
Yeah,
powerfully behind it.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
it is such a serious conversation, Wayne, that Adam Grant, who I think you know is a well regarded, you know, psychologist, industrial psychologist, highly respected author, tenured professor at Wharton, had to come out with a New York Times op-ed to say
yeah,
because so many of his students were saying to him, Adam, why do I need all this stuff? I mean, just rock and
yeah,
roll, focus on EBITDA, you know, drive the hell out of results, and you know
yeah,
the results, it doesn't matter anymore. Don't be so naive. It's just go crash through, get there. And you know, it spawned
yeah.
stuff like this satire of Mountainhead, you know, where I don't know if you've
I've
seen
read
the,
about it. Haven't seen it yet. I
no, it's
plan on
quite
seeing it.
interesting because it's a
Yeah,
satire, you know, on, you know, a couple, four billionaires getting together and essentially kind of having this kind
yeah,
of satirical debate. But anyway, you know, I think the data is for sure, you know, drives around being human centered and not, as you say, not being so arrogant to come from the point of view that you know the solution, but deeply listening to the human beings that are there and then
yeah,
building from that center.
yeah,
So when you see these remarkable, when you work with these unreasonable fellows, the ones that have founded these companies, there are about 400 of them. A lot of them are going to fail, but a lot of them are going to go and change the world for better. What do you think are some of the real positive characteristics around how they embrace this principle of human centered design? What do they do, Wayne? What would you like to see more of that you saw that you do? And then I'm going to ask you what you think's missing.
yeah, yeah. No, you know, I think with the founders, you know, the founders that I've worked with, Rebecca Cooey, who I believe it's Root Studio, that has this really, really brilliant business around actually helping indigenous groups essentially or catalog these incredible, beautiful patterns that they've come up with throughout millennia, probably. And so that when they're used by brands, for instance, a lot of luxury brands use that, but the people are actually compensated and it's tracked. And so for just thinking of her as an example, and she was traveling around, I think she spent several years, and hopefully I'm not getting this wrong, but sure that she was several years in India and seeing this incredible work being done by people passed down through generation after generation, and then seeing it show up on luxury brands with no recognition of actually who. And so for me, it's like the empathy there was, you know, her seeing these people that were struggling, yet producing something that was making massive profits. And so it was like this gap, right? Arbitrage gap, like an empathy gap. Like, what if we took care of the people doing this brilliance so that what 2, 3, 4, 5 generations in the future they can continue to do this? And she's just a great example. You know, I think that many of them they see something in the world that feels unjust, and then they connect it to an opportunity to do something in a new way that's really going to drive. Yes, these are companies, and so I mean, which does help fuel the growth. But then there's going to be this impact on the other side, and I think when they bring those together, it's like this magical formula that's so possible. But I think that to getting back to empathy being a bug, I think that there's an intellectual laziness of just saying like, let's not look for the second half of the equation. We've got something that's profitable. It just whereas I think it's that empathy and that creativity that says, let's actually take it a step further and see like, how can we do this thing so that it benefits these people. And I think that's a commonality across many of the ventures that I've worked with that are reasonable. It's just that intellectual and driven kind of motivation to do something and make the world better.
You know, I share that. It's so interesting because this afternoon, my wife Kathleen and I, we've been together 54 years. We have four grandchildren. Thank you. We have four grandchildren, and the 10-year-old is doing a presentation this afternoon. And the presentation came from an inspiration from the CEO of a company that's an unreasonable company called Cirque. And her and I were having a conversation one day around saying this guy, who's the CEO of Cirque, has recognized that one of the biggest wastes in the world is clothing. I mean, the clothing waste is so big that the landfills you can see from the space station, and most people wear clothes about an average of 7 times and they throw them away. And she got 10-year-old. So this afternoon, her presentation is around the whole reuse of fiber and clothing.
Wow.
And she goes to me yesterday, she was interviewing me to complete her presentation, and she said, Grandpa, I'm taking action on this. Everybody's got 40 tickets that they're going to come and bring clothing to the library and put their clothing out there, used clothing, and they can exchange 40 tickets of clothing.
That's beautiful.
And exactly so the point in all that, this is a 10-year-old in a little place in the middle of British Columbia, and these people have an impact.
Yeah.
They're an inspiration, and it gives us courage, moral courage, when we go forward and we people to work on these, and people like you support them so we can make the world better, and make money too. Make money and reinvest it and do all those things, but also do it in a way that is based on empathy towards each other, to the earth, to all the ecosystem that we're in, and I think we need to have these conversations to inspire, encourage. Wayne, what do you think of those founders because everybody struggles, right? They go through their peaks. But as a chief strategy officer when you were there, what was missing sometime? What do you think got in the way? And what advice would you have to people as they're going through the peaks and valleys of trying to make an impact?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many founders come from so many places. Quite a few of them, especially in the environmental space, are really, really strong technical experts. I mean, PhDs and various forms of engineering and physics, and I think sometimes the technology they come up with and like the need that they recognize is incredible. And I think that there are instances where finding the right partner who brings some of the other capabilities and really kind of going at it together is something where I could see a lot of benefit. And I know some of them do. I think that when they find somebody who complements them, allows them to be the expert that they are, to continue to work on but then having somebody who can help them make some of the decisions is, whether it's a really strong advisor, whether it's actually a co-CEO or COO. But I think it's partnering with somebody who complements your skills, because I think what sometimes, I've seen is a founder, again, brilliant individual, as the business starts growing and they get into different series of funding, they start agreeing to some of the terms and things that actually in the long run hurt them. And I think that that's one of the detriments, especially when you're in companies. At a certain point, if you brought on the wrong investors, they're going to look and they're going to say, by cutting out the impact, you can have more growth. And I think it's something that it's never the intention of the founder. often when that decision comes around, it's often the board, if they haven't made the right decisions and they don't have somebody who's an expert. Unfortunately, what happens is it's often displaced as well. They say, okay, you've gotten us to this point.
Time.
Somebody who's going to take you to the next level. And you don't know whether that person is going to carry the same soul that you put into the company to ensure that sometimes sacrificing some of the margin in order to stay true to purpose. And I would say that of all the founders that I met through Unreasonable Group, and there's dozens and dozens, they were purpose driven. I don't recall any of them saying, I want to get wealthy and buy islands and have multiple jets. That's not what it is. But I think that the scaling does require capital. And I don't know that they're always as well versed as they could be. Some of them definitely. There's some that were impressive that would just pick it up. And I would say that quite a few of them, I think, need more partnership in order to really make the right decisions.
Yeah, and having that right partner that allows you to stay true to purpose. Let's dig in more on purpose a little bit, true to purpose. One of the elements, and you and I talked about advancing culture, and one element I feel really strongly about is that people understand the why, the deep purpose, deep commitment to the purpose. And it's easy to get lost in it, right, Wayne? Because you're going along and you're trying to grow, and then you need that engineer that, those 3 engineers, and you got to build. All of a sudden, people come in and they don't have the same connection to purpose.
Yeah.
What would you advice be to leaders out there, next gen leaders, about staying true to purpose? How do you help organizations do that?
Yeah. It's funny because as I was thinking about, the unreasonable founders and, the type of help that they often need, I think it is also, really articulating purpose and making sure that it stays front and center and that every single hire that comes in understands what the purpose is and that they're there for purpose. So, I think that's one of the other areas sometimes where there's an assumption made by a founder that, oh, of course, everybody's going to know the purpose and really embody it. And that might work for the first dozen or few dozen people. But I think, again, what happens is once you get to a certain amount of scale and you have these pressures from investors in the market, et cetera, I think that it can be really difficult. For me, there's an exercise I've used before, which I call 3 steps to purpose. And I don't know, I won't take credit for making anything up because I feel like everything's been done somewhere, but it's a tool that I really have used, which is, for every single person in your company, in your organization, put the purpose up here and have them explain within 3 steps how what they do day to day actually has an impact on that purpose. Really have them identify, whatever. It could be it could be an accountant, it could be the janitor, but have them find a way so that they can easily and quickly explain. And when somebody asks them, relative attorney, whoever it might be, that they can say the purpose of the organization, and then they can say, and because I do this happens, therefore the purpose is impacted in this way. So there's really
to the bank audience, the 3-step process from Wayne Matamoros around 3 steps. That is a very practical, useful activity. Like you could see that happening on onboarding. You could see that, during check-in time. It's just helping people, remind them that, the relationship they have to making the purpose more true, because it's so easy to get caught in activity and transaction.
Yeah,
right?
and that's a big part of your job day to day. I mean, if you're cleaning floors, you're cleaning floors. But if you can look towards something that is enabling, that's bigger than you, than any type of position, you can really find a way that you're contributing, especially when you're in an organization. Because really, the second part to that is like systematizing it. It's like you mentioned, having everybody do this and how powerful it can be, but then you also need to make sure systems are in place so that they're rewarded for it.
Yeah.
So that when they, not just when they speak to this, but when they do this, and they do actually move us more towards the purpose. So somebody recognizes that and says, because you did this and this happened, we're getting closer. You never quite achieve your purpose. It should be so far off that you're always striving for more, but you're actually rewarded. So you need that system in place too, so that it's not just something that is inspiring and sounds beautiful. It does have to be inspiring and sound beautiful, but there's also systems in place. And I think there's sometimes a disconnect where the systems are all transaction. Anything that's values and purpose is, great to think about and really motivational. But when the two don't connect, that you get this incongruency where when it comes down, you know, when it comes down to it, the prioritization is going to go towards the things often that are incentivized. And so really, I think ensuring that is there. And I guess like finally the last point is as a leader embodying the purpose, speaking about it all the time,
Right.
making decisions, you know, making decisions based on purpose and values. And that includes really hard decisions and sometimes sacrificing something, you know, maybe not partnering with somebody that would bring, you know, would be really lucrative because they're just not aligned. And
Yeah.
saying, you know, this year we might not have bonuses and so this opportunity, you know, we just found that they weren't aligned. It makes me think of actually a company that I had worked with reasonable, it's not coming to it, but they made construction materials out of mushrooms, and somebody offered them funding if they would move to a certain geography, and it was quite a stable amount. They said no, because if we did that, we would have to ship our product, which would make it less sustainable, and we would not be true to our purpose. And they actually turned on a significant amount of funding,
Yeah.
and let their company know that we're not going to grow as quickly as we could have, because that would be a betrayal, and the leadership took that on themselves to do it. And that's when I think that the leaders at the time, it's when you know they make these hard decisions, they take the flak for it, but they take it back to purpose and values and in a way that's real, not just words on a website.
And they're every leader and founder in some way, either big or small, runs
Mm-hmm.
into a moment of truth
Yep.
when you are called to make that decision. You
Yeah.
know, you and I talked a little bit, and we won't get into the specific name of the company, but the airline that was an emerging, growing airline. And if you go on their website, they've got this beautiful purpose statement around
Yeah.
making travel accessible and people's dreams come true and the values. And then they're asked to fly uh, immigrants to
Yep.
Sudan, San Salvador, and as a lucrative government offer,
Yeah.
the CEO comes on and says, "Hey, this is not part of our values and our purpose, but we can't afford to pass up on the contract." And I'll tell you, it may be the right, quote, short-term business decision, but you
Yeah.
might as well throw your purpose and your values out the window.
Yeah. No, I think right now, I mean, I think right now is the ultimate test. I mean, I think you're seeing it with law firms, a lot of law firms who decided, you know, to just betray what they say their purpose was, and you know, kind of succumb, and those that are fighting, and you know, kind of taking a significant risk. What's interesting though is like with the, you know, with the law firms, for instance, there's now been this exodus of a lot of the ones who just kind of succumb to the pressure. There's an exodus to the others.
Right.
And even the client exodus. Like partners are leaving and saying, if we're not going to stand up for something, I'm leaving. But then you have clients saying, well, if you're not going to stand up and fight and you're a law firm, I don't believe in you. I'm going to go to one of these over here that's actually fighting. So
Yeah.
I think it might be a longer term play. It is a longer term play, but I think that it does eventually come around. I think we do end up seeing that companies that stay true to purpose, you know, do come around, and you know, and I hope as well that they in this moment of just, you know, what I call rotating chaos right now, and that we do start to see some companies coming back and saying that no, we need to come back to purpose and being equipped. Yeah.
And deeply live their deeply held beliefs and values and find a way that you can go forward and make all you can, you know, you have to make these choices. And it comes down to us as individuals.
Yeah.
It's no different than in our daily lives. You know, we can espouse our purpose and our values, and then we're confronted with situations that, I mean, we're not perfect human beings, but the end with that is that we've got to be more true than not, or we have no authenticity, no integrity. And I think I can't help, and hopefully I'm not poking at some intellectual property, but on your whiteboard board behind you, I can't help, you know, leadership culture. You've got a model there. Are you willing to share the model and what you're thinking?
Yeah, it's funny. So, as you mentioned, I'm an adjunct professor at NYU. So, Stern School of Business, co-teach a course with Christina Goldschmidt, who's a VP at Warner Music Group, who actually, board that I'm on with StreamYard in the Bronx. It's an arts. They just mentioned Warner Music Group actually has a foundation around social justice, and speaking of purpose, they asked them, and they said that their foundation is staying present. We're still going to support social justice. Kind of makes sense. So she's a co-professor with me, and so we teach innovation in large organizations. And it's a really fun course. It's for a tech MBA program, so a lot of tech-minded individuals come into it. And so we were talking the other day about, how does innovation happen in large organizations? And so in the middle, I talked a little bit about this a minute ago. There's this Phillips framework. It's called the to do so. Technical objective meets a design objective, meets a strategic objective. And so it's a process in order to match, human need with the tech need with the market need. But then, as we talk more, we're talking about, well, in order for that process to work, leadership needs to be leadership needs to support barriers. But then at the end of the day, if the culture is not one that actually celebrates creativity and risk taking, then the process doesn't work. Leadership isn't empowered, and nothing innovative happens.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's just like the culture in any organization wraps everything that you do. And so, for anything to be innovative and to really do anything that's impactful, the culture has to support it. Because if it's not supported, then everybody just does what they think is in their own self-interest. And you get, incentives that take things down the Enron path, or you get a lot of, short-term thinking. And I think that's part of, the problem that we have right now in terms of businesses. The short-termism just has everybody thinking, what do we do for next quarter? And not looking. And to me, it's, and you of course know this in the culture space, is the amount of convincing to get companies to invest in culture and leadership role, especially culture. It takes so much longer. The cycle's so much slower. And the number of explanations you need to give, even though, as you said, like data point after data point supports it, and it's sustainable. It takes you, it's even without the process in the middle. If you have culture of innovation, people find a way to innovate. So yeah.
I want to connect and build with that our audience too around I'm sitting there and I'm talking to a director, emerging managers, or CEOs, or you name it, up top to bottom, and they're going, Lorne, I'm getting all this pressure to use AI and to teach everybody how to prompt and how to use these tools,
Yeah.
and everybody's talking about efficiency like we always do, I guess, to some extent, but there's additional pressure on it, as you say, often kind of reinforced by the short-term focus. Plus, you've got all this chaos out there going, where the hell's the world going, right?
Yeah.
And so I do need everybody to be highly adaptable, but they're afraid, or they seem paralyzed, or they don't seem as urgent as me. What the hell do I do? How do I make that happen? And, don't talk to me about this culture stuff out here. It's kind of like, you're asking me to go vape when I've got this go meat stuff in front of me. So how do we help in the most practical way with that? How do we help these leaders?
Yeah, no, it's a good point, because culture doesn't change overnight.
Right.
And so to your point, when they say everybody's afraid, it should, as a leader, should make you be introspective and say, what did I do to make them afraid? Because that's what you need to undo. Because there's something that was, if you're a brand new leader, you just, okay, that's a different situation. But I would say most of the time, it is, seasoned leaders who have been there. And we're saying people are afraid, we're not getting innovation, they won't take risks. And you have to ask yourself, it's like, what have we done? As leaders, what have we done? So I think that sometimes culture, I love a lot of, the strategy is, I love bottom-up approaches. But I think actually when you're looking to change a culture, the commitments and the signals do need to come from leaders.
100%. They have to. And, when, a leader at the top of the organization says, we've got too many of you middle managers. We're going to take 15,000 of you out of the business. Well, by the way, we want you to go out and innovate like hell, and to go out and make sure
Yes.
they're and really fired up and urgent.
Yeah.
Dilemmas, these paradoxes going on at the same time. But I completely agree with you that, if you're at the top of the organization, you have to ask yourself, if people are feeling fearful, or if they're being hesitant, what am I doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah.
It's getting in the way of that, because it's that, Marcus Aurelius Stoic kind of thing. What's in the way is the way. But it's hard. You have to be, you have to have the courage to be self-reflective because I think, everybody needs to have a growth and disruptive mindset in the world we live in today. The end with that is that, it doesn't work with no safety net. So safety net. Without getting too much into pop culture, but I noticed the number one movie on Netflix right now is a movie called Straw, and it's about a black woman who's a single mom who loses everything, and she's so desperate she ends up killing a person and robbing a bank. But what is so interesting about why it's the number one movie, I think, is because of the where we started this conversation.
Yeah.
Is empathy.
Yeah.
Is that if we lose our empathy, if we don't have an understanding that it's our human nature to both be excited about change, but also to be fearful about not being loved or cared for or losing our way,
Yeah.
and finding a way to address that in open, constructive ways,
Yeah.
then we get this weird kind of a narrow view, and we have
Yeah.
to get ourselves out of that. Anyway, I don't mean to get carried away with that, but I just find it so curious, don't you, that at the end of the day, we start with empathy, and it's not a defect.
It's not a defect.
Human-centered design is a strength. It
Yeah.
is a core. It's about you and me, Wayne.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things like creativity and play. So you mentioned your grandmother. It's natural. And so at what point does it get taken out of us?
Right.
At what point are we convinced that it's a weakness? Because she came up with a brilliant idea of empathy. Empathy for the planet.
Right.
Empathy for other people, the people who work in the construction world, used by it. So she naturally has empathy and used it as a way to do something brilliant. So at what point are we convincing kids or young people that it's not the right way? Like, why are we having to learn it and making it this discipline almost to learn it?
And we know that the chances are, and of course, that there's also a competing viewpoint out there from other 10-year-olds, believe it or not. What you really need to do is to get your mom and dad to buy you a fridge so they can go to Sephora and buy, $1,000 worth of makeup,
Yeah.
which is, is to me is like
Yeah.
completely delusionary craziness. But
Yeah.
but it's the world we live in around, not only does she need to be freed up to play and to be creative, but also then we need to be there and around her to have the courage to navigate through what's going to be natural resistance and pushback from
Yeah.
other perspectives, which comes down to this moral courage that we're looking in each other. We're not
Yeah.
perfect. We're imperfect. We
Yeah.
are totally imperfect. Human-centered design, I don't think, Wayne, you never talk about perfection, do you?
No. There's no such thing. It's all about iteration, and there is also this idea of life-centric design and planet-centric design. So even the critiquing of human-centric design, I think, is very appropriate. But there's also other ways to look at it. There's a lot of thinking. Alison Taylor, who wrote Higher Ground, she's another professor at Stern, and she talks a lot about how when you actually put human rights as the focal point of your impact strategy, that includes environment and all of these other externalities, but you can measure them by the impact on humans, because that's what's kind of most, we can empathize with it more and we can measure it more, but that it's inclusive of the planet,
Okay.
when you look at what we're seeing. But no, so I think that it's a human-centric design. It's evolving. You never have perfect. You can always get better, and I think that's part of the philosophy behind it.
Well,
is continual improvement.
And connecting into this iterative continual improvement kind of imperfection yet. Well, I live in Alberta and in British Columbia, and in Alberta, part of our audience for sure is somebody's a manager in an oil and gas company. And they're a mid manager. They've got their director, they're an MBA probably. They're working for one of the top oil and gas companies in the world, and they're listening to this, and they're going,
Yeah.
Wayne, you're in New York. You're one of these
Yeah.
Stern School professors living in New York and Queens. I'm in Calgary, Alberta.
Yeah.
And I've got to run a company that uses natural resources.
Yeah.
And I know, I'm not dumb. I know that I want the environment to be better. And so how do I connect human-centered design with
Yeah,
empathy? And also I'm in a business by its nature is complicated. It's,
yeah,
I got to get resources out of the ground. And frankly, I'd like to see the Indians and Chinese off coal. And I think if they use our natural gas, it's better for the world.
yeah,
But how do we connect this? How do we connect this to the world that we're living in
yeah.
more completely?
Yeah, no, it's a great challenge because, the other aspect of, this middle manager that's in Alberta, is the fact that they have a family and a house.
Yeah.
And so they're also thinking like, well, I also just need to make money, to keep my family fed and send my kids to school, and that's all fair. I think for me, like one of the things as I move through the consulting world, helping lots of corporations around the world, to really implement human-centered design, to solve things, I developed this idea. Again, I won't take credit because I never know what I acquired from somebody or come up with, but I call it like backdoor impact. And what I would do is, as I would work with different organizations, companies especially, is when you're working with them, even if they didn't ask for it, bring up impact, bring up, whether it's environmental or human social impact, bring it up in the conversation and start trying to find out, like I mentioned about laziness sometimes with companies and technologies, is challenge them to say, how could you make this better for the communities that you're in? How could you help make this better? And what's amazing is that, again, getting back to it isn't a defect. There's no, when you bring it up and you give permission, I would say that 99% of the executives and across many financial industries and pharmaceutical industries, many different industries, when you bring it up and you actually give them permission, and they're naturally driven towards doing something that makes them feel better.
I completely agree. And to your point too, is we have this philosophy of one of our elements is that in being people first is that people are the source.
Yep.
People are the source. And if we're given an opportunity to find a way, then and even when the choices can be that are difficult,
Yeah.
we often find a way to make a more
Right.
positive impact, to make it better. And yeah, we may not, we're not saying anybody quit being in oil and gas. I mean, that's not practical. Got an entire economy here in Western Canada that's built on it. And they turn to Landman and watch Landman on, and they get vindicated around.
No windmills. Terrible. Completely false in terms of the windmill statement, by the way. I saw a presentation about how false that it takes more energy to create a windmill than they save over like 5 years or something. It's absolutely not true.
But Taylor
It's like
shared it. He
six
knows how to
months.
put that into the
Hmm.
script, make it interesting.
Hmm.
But the point is that we open ourselves to conversation. We open ourselves to more complete view. And
Yeah,
and I agree. Give people an opportunity to find a way. We find a way. We find
yeah,
a way often, not perfectly forward. Look, if you were for all the people that are listening, if you were to give them a couple closing kind of ways of just thinking about how to keep centered
yeah,
on human-centered design,
yeah.
what is the Matamoros view on that? What's your advice? What's your counsel?
Yeah. It's funny because it's actually in some ways that there's hundreds of methods of this, but the one thing I tell so many executives around this is go out and talk to people. It's amazing how many executives I've worked with in many different geographies, many different industries, that when you say, when was the last time that you went out and spoke to, whether it's a customer, a citizen, a patient, whatever, like when did you actually sit down and talk with them? And what you learn, I mean, I will often send out executives and say, oh, I did this in Norway with a bank that I worked with there. I said, the executive team, I said, go out, find one of your customers, buy them coffee, and just ask them about their life. And when they came back in, a number of them had said, one, it's been years since I've spoken to a customer. Two, insights, go, I learned this, and this. And three, it's like they say, this is so easy, I'm going to do this all the time.
You know,
You know,
I didn't know what you were going to say, but I could honestly virtually just hug the hell out of you because I have said this to CEOs, look, if you want to change your culture, first of all, you need to be the culture you want to, but
yeah,
go and sit down. If you allowed people to just share their stories in your organization, every person, just 1 hour, just in conversation, and the data's there. I
Yeah.
can pull out all the research, Deep Seeker, you name it, or
Yeah.
you can give you all the research data.
Yeah.
You would change the world. But you know what? They look at their agendas, and man, those calendars are back to back meetings that
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
not involve conversations that tap into the real life of the human beings that make up their world. And I get it. I've been there. I've been one of those guys.
Yeah.
Go home
Yeah.
and Kathleen would say to me, "How was your day?" "Oh, back to backs, back to
Yeah.
back bullshit." Read a lot of times,
Yeah.
but man, did I feel good about it. Anyway,
Yeah.
human centered. In some ways, it's that simple and that hard. Thank you for having the courage to lead what you
Yeah.
do what you do, to be in that fight. Any closing comments or things you'd like to just part to our audience?
No, I mean, I think as I mentioned right now, not to get too dire or anything, but I think right now our purpose is being tested globally as nations, as citizens, as people from different cultures, backgrounds. And I think right now is the time to stay true to purpose as leaders in the organizations that you lead and as individuals. So I think it's these things where it's damn hard. And I think, um, maybe the idea of empathy being involved is because it takes effort and dedication to keep being empathetic and to make decisions based on empathy as opposed to whether it's growth or just, wins or whatever it might be. And so I think for me, it's just, just keep your purpose at the center of what you do because someday you're going to look back at it, and be thankful that you did. And I'll be just with a kind of a paraphrase of a quote that I lived years ago for when I did undergrad at the University of California, San Diego. We had Patch Adams speak. I don't know if you remember the movie
Yeah,
with
yeah,
Robin Williams.
yeah.
So the real Patch Adams was there. And
Wow.
he's this doctor who's opened up the Good Samaritan Institutes in one of some of the most vulnerable places in the world. Just done incredible work. And I remember he was telling all of us, and the whole during classes, he was saying, I've been, it's the same thing. Again, paraphrasing says, I've been with more than 3,000 people on their deathbeds. He said, more than 3,000 easily. And he said, and not a single one asked for more. He said, they all ask for more love.
Yeah,
And so I think for me, whenever I looked at, my purpose and decisions, don't get me wrong, sometimes drawn, there's things, flashy things I look at. But I think it's like for me that purpose of just really staying true to who I am, and thinking about his quote, when the day arrives to be able to look back and say, I stayed true to who I was.
yeah.
So yeah, that's for people, it's funny, this was many years ago now, 26 years ago, I guess, since I graduated. And I still, on a weekly basis, probably tell somebody that quote. So
That,
yeah,
that's a great story to end with. I'm going to be in the city in October. If
excellent.
you're around, I'm going to go and take you up and having that beer somewhere in Queens.
Absolutely.
And thanks for joining us. And yeah, let's keep the courage to stay committed to the fact that at the end it's about love and time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much for the opportunity, Lorne. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. All right, take care. Bye bye.